Don't forget to like, share, and comment on this video. Subscribe to our channel to stay updated with our latest stories. I never imagined I'd be in this situation at 62 years old. Life was supposed to be predictable by now, but mornings were spent tending to my garden, afternoons were filled with quiet reading, and evenings were spent with my husband, Mark, reminiscing about the years behind us. But one evening, a private conversation changed everything, leaving me questioning everything I thought I knew. It all started with a corporate gala hosted by Mark's company, where he had worked for over 3 decades, rising through the ranks with unwavering dedication. His boss, Richard Caldwell, was a man of quiet authority, someone I had only exchanged polite pleasantries with at previous events. He was in his mid-60s, tall and distinguished, with an air of quiet confidence that seemed effortless. The gala was held at an upscale hotel in downtown Chicago. Grand chandeliers cast a warm glow over the elegantly dressed attendees. The room hummed with conversation, the clinking of glasses, and the soft melody of a live jazz band in the corner. I wasn't particularly fond of these events, preferring the comfort of home, but Mark insisted, so I slipped into a modest navy blue dress and agreed to accompany him. Everything seemed perfectly ordinary at first, with Mark caught up in discussions with his colleagues and me occupying myself by chatting with the other spouses, until Richard approached me. "Evelyn, may I have a moment?" he asked, his deep voice carrying over the room. I hesitated for a moment, wondering what Mark's boss could possibly want with me, but I smiled lightly and nodded, following him. As he led me down a side corridor, away from the main ballroom, the sounds of the gala faded behind us. He guided me to a private lounge, a cozy room with dim lighting and a fireplace. The tension in the air was subtle but undeniable. I could feel my heart beating just a little faster as I took a seat across from him. "I hope I'm not pulling you away from anything important," he said, offering a small, almost nervous smile. "Not at all," and I assured him, though I couldn't shake the curiosity bubbling inside me. "What's on your mind, Al?" he asked, sighing and rubbing his hands together as if searching for the right words. Finally, he spoke. "It's about Mark," he said. At that, I straightened in my chair, my stomach tightening. "Is something wrong?" He hesitated. "Not exactly, but there's something I think you should know." I could feel the weight of his words before he even said them. There was a seriousness in his expression that unsettled me. The intensity of his voice made my pulse quicken. "Evelyn," he continued, his voice gentle but firm, "I've been watching him for a long time, supporting his career, his colleagues, and his family. Through it all, I noticed something." I swallowed hard. "What is it?" He leaned forward slightly, his gaze locked onto mine. "He doesn't appreciate you the way he should." The words landed like a heavy stone in my chest. My breath caught, and I felt an immediate wave of defensiveness rise within me. "I don't understand," I stammered. "Mark is a good husband. He's always been." Richard nodded. "I know he is. But tell me, Evelyn, when was the last time he truly saw you, not just as his wife, but as the remarkable woman that you are?" I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came. He continued, his voice softer now. "I've seen the way you look at him when he's too busy to notice, watching you stand in the background at events like these while he loses himself in work. You give so much, but does he give back?" A lump formed in my throat. I wanted to protest, to tell him that he was wrong, but something deep inside me wavered. "I didn't mean to overstep," Richard said, leaning back slightly. "But sometimes an outsider sees what those inside cannot." I exhaled slowly, my mind racing. Richard studied my face, then offered a small, knowing smile. "Evelyn, you deserve to be seen." The words struck a chord I hadn't realized existed within me, and for the first time in a long while, I wasn't sure what to feel. I sat there, frozen. Richard's words echoed in my mind, stirring something I wasn't ready to confront. "You deserve to be seen." Had I really gone unnoticed for so long? I wanted to dismiss his words as mere observation, a well-intentioned but misguided attempt at kindness. But deep down, something in me knew he was right. Mark was a good man and a hardworking provider. He had always been steady and reliable, but in the quiet moments, the ones that mattered, when had he last truly looked at me? When had he noticed the small ways I tried to keep our life warm and full? The way I folded his shirts just the way he liked, the way I kept our home filled with his favorite things, the way I stood by his side through every career triumph and setback. I cleared my throat, pushing down the emotions that threatened to overwhelm me. The lump that had settled in my throat, Richard. I held up a hand to stop myself. I don't mean to make you uncomfortable, but I couldn't just stand by and say nothing. I took a slow breath and appreciated your honesty. I said, though my voice was softer than I had intended. Mark and I have been together for decades, and marriage is about more than being seen. It's about commitment and stability. Richard nodded. I know that, and I respect that. He leaned forward, his gaze unwavering. Have you ever asked yourself what you truly want? The question lingered between us. What I wanted? I had spent so many years focused on what Mark needed, what our marriage required, what was expected of me. I had never really stopped to think about what I wanted. A small, nervous laugh escaped me. Richard, this is quite a conversation to be having at a corporate gallery. That made him smile. I suppose it is, but something told me I needed to say it. A moment of silence stretched between us, filled only by the soft crackling of the fireplace. Then he sighed, standing up. I should let you get back, he said. I stood there, smoothing my dress with slightly trembling hands. Yes, Mark would wonder where I was. Richard nodded, but there was something unreadable in his expression. Evelyn had just promised me something. I tilted my head. What is it? I asked. Don't dismiss what I said. Think about it. I hesitated, then nodded slowly. All right, he said, giving me a small smile before stepping aside and gesturing toward the door. As I walked past him, I felt the warmth of his presence beside me, the weight of the conversation still pressing on my chest. The gala was still in full swing when I returned. Mark was exactly where I had left him, deep in conversation with his colleagues. He didn't notice me at first. I stood at a distance for a moment. His face was animated as he spoke, his hands moving with each word. It was a sight to behold, and I had always loved his passion and drive. But then, I thought about what Richard had said. Had Mark ever looked at me like that? When he finally glanced over and saw me standing there, he gave me a small nod before turning back to his conversation. Something inside me shifted. Richard had planted a seed, and no matter how much I tried to ignore it, I knew it was already beginning to grow. The drive home was quiet. Mark sat beside me, his hands firmly gripping the wheel, his gaze focused on the dark road ahead. The city lights flickered past us in a blur, but my mind was elsewhere. Richard's words echoed in my head, his voice lingering. You deserve to be seen. I stole a glance at Mark. He looked tired, with the faintest crease of stress between his brows. We had been married for nearly 40 years, and in that time, I had memorized every detail of his face. The sharp lines of his jaw, the way his eyes crinkled when he laughed, the way his lips pressed together in concentration. But when was the last time he had really looked at me? He cleared his throat, breaking the silence. Did you have a good time tonight? The question caught me off guard. It was something he asked after every event, every gathering, every dinner party, almost as if it were out of obligation rather than genuine curiosity. I hesitated before answering. It was interesting, I said. He nodded absently. Good, good. And just like that, the conversation ended. I turned my gaze back to the window, watching the city slipping away as we moved toward the quiet suburbs. When we got home, Mark did what he always did. He took off his jacket and set his keys on the counter, then retreated to his office for one last check of his emails. I stood in the kitchen, staring at the empty space where he had just been. I wasn't angry with him, not exactly. Mark had always been dedicated to his work and steady in his routines. He had given me a good, secure life. But Richard's words unearthed something in me that I couldn't ignore. I walked to the bedroom and caught my reflection in the mirror. 62-year-old me, with my once auburn hair now carrying streaks of silver. Faint lines traced my face, reminders of the years I'd lived. But my eyes were still the same. In them, I saw something that I hadn't noticed in a long time: loneliness. I'd always assumed that this was just part of aging, this quiet fading. In the background, this gradual slipping into a routine, but now, for the first time, I wondered if it was the next morning. As Mark left for work, he kissed me on the cheek and said, "I'll be home late. There's a big client meeting." I nodded, offering a small smile, saying, "All right, be safe." And then he was gone. I stood in the doorway for a long moment before stepping back inside. Normally, I would fill my day with errands, housework, or gardening, but today I felt restless. Before I could talk myself out of it, I reached for my phone and dialed a number I never thought I would. Richard answered on the second ring. "Ring Evelyn." His voice carried a faint note of surprise. I took a deep breath. "Do you have time for a cup of coffee?" There was a pause, and then softly, "Of course." An hour later, I found myself sitting across from him in a quiet cafe near the lake. The air smelled of roasted coffee beans and fresh pastries, and outside, autumn leaves danced in the breeze. Richard looked at me with quiet curiosity. I wasn't sure if I would hear from him. I stirred my coffee, watching the swirls of cream blend into the dark liquid. I wasn't sure what to say. He nodded, waiting. I exhaled slowly. "I've been thinking about what you said," I interrupted. His expression remained unreadable, and I hesitated, then met his gaze. "You were bright." Something flickered in his eyes, something I couldn't quite name. "Evelyn, I'm not saying that I regret my life. Mark and I have built something strong, something real, but somewhere along the way, I think I forgot how to want something for myself." Richard leaned forward slightly and swallowed hard. "Now, I don't know." A silence settled between us, filled only by the distant sounds of conversation around us. Finally, Richard spoke, his voice quiet. I just wanted him to be happy. I looked at him, really looked at him. Here was a man who had no reason to interfere in my life, no reason to say the things he had, except that he saw something in me that even I hadn't. And suddenly I realized I had a choice to make. I sat there, staring at Richard across the small cafe table, my hands wrapped around the warm ceramic of my coffee cup. "I just want him to be happy." His words hung in the air, heavy, yet gentle, like a truth that I had been avoiding for far too long. For years, I had told myself that contentment was enough. Security, stability, and loyalty were the pillars of a good life, and they were. But Richard had uncovered something else in me, something I hadn't even known was missing. A need to feel. I took a slow breath, the weight of my thoughts pressing down on me. "Richard, I don't know what to do with all this." His eyes softened. "You don't have to do anything, Edelyn. Just think about what makes you happy. When was the last time you did something just for yourself?" I opened my mouth to respond, but stopped. When was the last time I had spent time on myself? Decades ensuring Mark's support, his career, his goals, and his world remained intact. I had created a life of order and routine, but what about me? I took a sip of my coffee, the rich, bitter warmth grounding me for a moment. I don't know who I am outside my marriage. I admitted the word surprising, even to myself. Richard gave me a knowing smile. Then maybe it was time to find out. I let out a nervous laugh that sounded terrifying, but also exciting. Don't you think? I didn't answer because deep down I knew he was right. We sat in silence for a while, the world outside moving as usual. Cars passing, people laughing, the wind rustling the golden autumn leaves. Life didn't stop for reflection, but maybe for the first time I needed it. Finally, I set my cup down and met his gaze. I don't know what the future holds, Richard, but I do know that I need to start living again. A smile tugged at my lips. I wanted to let you know that night when Mark came home, I was already sitting at the kitchen table waiting. He barely looked at me when he set his briefcase down and loosened his tie. He said he was exhausted after a long day, and I watched him move around the house. There was a distance between us that I hadn't noticed growing over the years. I took a deep breath and asked if we could talk. Finally, he glanced at me and asked what I wanted to say. His brows furrowed slightly, and I hesitated before saying the words that had been building inside me since last night. I felt invisible, and I said that I felt like I'd spent years being a wife who supports you, who keeps things running, and who makes sure everything stays steady. I love you, but somewhere along the way, I stopped being seen. He frowned, clearly caught off guard. Evelyn, where is this coming from? I shook my head. It's been there for a long time. I just never let myself say it out loud. He sat down across from me, rubbing a hand over his face. I didn't know you felt this way. I studied him carefully. Did you ever wonder? He was silent, and at that moment, I realized something painful. Mark wasn't a bad husband. He wasn't cruel or neglectful on purpose. He had simply assumed that marriage meant routine and that comfort was enough. We didn't need to check in with each other the way we once did, but that wasn't living. That wasn't love. Not anymore. What are you saying? He finally asked. His voice is cautious. I inhaled deeply. I need to start living for myself again. His face paled slightly. Are you leaving me? I hesitated, then shook my head. I don't know what the future holds, Mark. But I do know that I can't keep looking like this. And if we want this marriage to survive, something has to change. He looked at me for a long time, and for the first time, I saw a hint of vulnerability in his eyes. For the first time in years, I saw something flicker in his eyes. I realized that maybe we had a chance to fix this. Maybe we didn't, but for the first time in decades, I was ready to find out.